at this passage, I have two things underlined. A great sign appeared in heaven, another sign appeared in heaven. This is not something we see John say very often. And I believe that this is a reference to things that were actually happening in the sky among the stars in the constellations. And what John is saying is that this has been played out, mapped out before our eyes in the stars, right? And then the verses that follow this then give us insight into what was happening in the unseen realm. So this is what we can see in the heavens. And then he's going to elaborate and even explain some of these symbols and what was happening in the unseen realm, what was happening behind the scenes. And here's what I mean by that. If we look at the night sky, there's a constellation called Virgo, which would be the Virgin, right? Which we know Mary was a virgin, and she's the one who gave birth to Jesus. So that's Virgo. And if you look, it actually looks like a person laying down. Well, when it comes to the dragon, the red dragon, there are a couple of constellations that could potentially fit. I know some people might immediately think of Draco, but Draco's over the North Pole, so that would not fit here. But also in the description of the dragon, it says 7 heads. Well, that's more like Hydra, and Hydra is right next to Virgo. And there is another constellation that sits on Hydra called Crater, which is meant to be a goblet. But if you look, it could also look like a crown, like those diadems that Hydra's supposed to be, or that the dragon's supposed to be wearing. Okay. So if we go back to the description, a woman, the Virgo, clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. So that's the first sign. Then the second sign is the red dragon with the 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 diadems. Okay. And he stood before the woman who's about to give birth. So far, so good as far as, okay, well, here's Virgo, and right next to her is Hydra, and Hydra has Crater, which kind of looks like a crown on it. Okay. But there's more clues to that passage that are relevant, and it's the fact that she was clothed with the sun. There are moments in which the sun will be in the midst of Virgo, and it'll look like she's wearing the sun. And there's also times where the moon will be at what are the feet of Virgo. But it's a rare thing to see both happening at the same time, the sun in her midst and the moon at her feet. Then you also add in the 12 stars on her head. Well, above her is the constellation Leo, okay, which is the lion, which Jesus is the lion of the tribe of Judah. Well, there's also moments in which Jupiter, who would be considered the king planet, lines up within Leo and ends up making it a constellation of 12 stars. So, what's the moment in which all those things happen? That you have Virgo and Hydra, who are always near each other, but you also then have the sun in her midst, the moon at her feet, and Jupiter inside Leo, which then brings 12 stars at her head like a crown. Well, that happened on September 11th, 3 BC. And you can see in the image there, the sun looks like it's clothing her. The moon is at her feet. Jupiter is with Regulus up in Leo. Hydra's right there. This is what it would have looked like, and it would match what John is saying were signs in heaven. And I have a quote here from this website that did the calculations according to what they know about constellations and time, and this is what they said. Jupiter joined Regulus, chief star in the constellation of Leo the Lion, which would mean the royal planet, which is Jupiter, and the royal star, Regulus, okay? In other places, they'll see king planet and king star. So you have the king planet, the royal planet, the king star, the royal star in Leo the Lion. I mean, that right there, it all points to Jesus. The sun was in Virgo. That's the Virgin constellation. The new moon in the royal constellation Leo, but the moon you can see is at her feet. Okay, so at this time the moon's at her feet though. The first day of the Jewish New Year is Tishri 1. After this first conjunction, Jupiter continued on its normal course in the heavens. Now, in Jerusalem on September 10th, 3 BC, sunset was at 6:19 p.m. and moonset was at 7:40 p.m. Now, according to the Jewish calendar, days were measured sunset to sunset. So because of that, he would have been born on what we consider September 11th, the next day. And it says sometime in that 81-minute span of time between sunset and moonset. Okay, because the sun can't be in her if the sun's not visible, but then the moon needs to be at her feet, right? So between 6:19 p.m. and 7:40 p.m., okay, when the calendar is shifting from September 10th to September 11th, Jesus would have been born sometime in that, because that's when this picture would have happened. 81 minutes. So all these factors lining up, they would have only been there for 81 minutes. And so what this person believes is that Jesus was most likely born then at 7 p.m. because God is very exact. He often uses sevens. 7 is completion. It's a divine number. And it's at 7 p.m. that the moon would have been in the midst of her feet. So we say all this because when we look at the passage, he is giving us something beyond just telling us about these events, okay? What he is letting us know, which really aligns with other passages about how God reveals things, in the stars, as well as the firmament declares his glory, and that nature reveals things. Okay, so John is saying there's signs in the heavens. Okay, so one, we know that Jesus was born September 11th, 3 BC, within that 81-minute period, most likely at 7 p.m. because God likes sevens. It's the divine number. That's also when the moon would have been in the midst of her feet. And also, Jupiter being with Regulus would have been the star that the Magi then followed, okay, because it would have been so bright. So when we look at all these different factors, right, that's what we're seeing here, is that John is telling us, using the events that happened in the stars to lay out what was going on. That the woman Israel, okay, and we know specifically Mary the Virgin, she was pregnant and giving birth. The dragon was there waiting to devour, and we know that he attempted to devour Jesus through Herod, who issued the decree to slaughter all the boys under the age of 2. And Jesus was only spared because God sent Joseph a dream saying, go to Egypt. Okay. So that's when we're looking at these different events that are being described in these first few verses of Revelation 12.